Okay? All right. So we're going to go next into inverters. And I'm going to, for the purpose of this section, I'm going to focus a lot on just inverters only, but it would apply in somewhat to inverter chargers as well. There are distinctions, and it does make things a little bit more complicated, but we're going to focus on inverters. Okay. So, inverter. What does an inverter do? The inverter is right here. And you'll see what I'm trying to distinguish is an AC panel with non-inverter loads and an AC panel with inverter loads. There's a little bit difference. There's many ways of wiring an inverter. This is probably the most popular way, most common way. Another thing too that I want to emphasize is notice how there's an inverter service disconnect. 90% of you that have an inverter on your boat do not have that switch. Why? Because no one read the manual and because it will work without it. Like your car does not need a seatbelt to bring you from A to B. So anything that is safety on a boat, generally that is done by a do-it-yourself or a previous owner, is done to the very least amount of effort possible. Okay? Hence the code absolutely stipulates that an inverter have a service disconnect switch, which is different than the on and off button on your inverter charger. Okay? Completely different. You need a battery switch. You need a device that can actually disconnect your inverter from a power. And the reason is because if you ever go and actually touch your AC system and change an AC outlet, there's this incredibly what was thought to be beneficial feature that can be life-threatening. Your inverter has this mode called load sense. What is load sense? Load sense is something that says, if I don't have a load, let me shut myself off. You can, on most inverters, set what load sense will be, 5 watts, 50 watts, whatever it is. Now you think you're smarter. You got this. I will check if my inverter's on. You come in with a little magic wand that you bought at Home Depot, you look around the AC outlet, no AC. You're like, I knew it was off. I just confirmed it. I'm going to do a second thing. I'm going to put in a small little plug, the GFCI plug, and I'm going to see if I've got power there. The lights don't light up. Done 2 methods. Practically genius. I got this, right? Take out the outlet. Now you're thinking, my inverter's off. I told it to be off. It is off. I'm good. I checked. Now you touch the hot and the neutral. Your fingers is definitely more than 5 watt load. The inverter goes, oh, someone wants us to invert. Suddenly the inverter comes on and you get electrocuted. Now, if it was just being burnt, honestly, because I've actually put my hand on a stovetop when I was young more than once, it's okay. You'll live. You know what I mean? Like, honestly, you'll probably live. It's going to hurt a lot, but you'll live. But with AC, it's more than pain, right? It's the fact that it's alternating current, right? You could literally die. That's why you need an inverter service disconnect, okay? So absolutely essential. Honestly, 90% of you don't have one. You just don't. Because you don't need one. You don't need a seatbelt to drive your car. And the owner that put the inverter on board simply didn't read the manual, because an inverter manual, no joke, is about 80 pages deep. And anybody who looks at an 80-page manual, that's a book. It's a book. It takes time. Like, it's a commitment to read an inverter manual. And no one's going to do that when they're tasked with doing a project. So make sure that you have that. All right, so we're going to go in. So what is...
Jeff,
yeah, go ahead.
So when I'm touching my AC stuff, I need that off and my AC power off.
Yeah, and you know what? And that's a good point. Let me bring that... Let me actually... Because this is life-threatening, right? Safety, right? Like, I'm kind of crazy that way. Like, I'm always worried about safety. I asked this question. I'm going to ask the room. If you're going to play with your... You're going to touch AC on your boat. What would be, show of hands, or tell me, anybody in the room, what they would do before they change an outlet, an AC outlet on their boat? Anybody want to take a guess at what you should do before you change an AC outlet on your boat? Go ahead.
Disconnect the power.
How do you disconnect? Well, what do you do to disconnect shore power? What would you do?
You can disconnect it on the box or disconnect it from the boat where it goes into the boat.
So you would actually physically disconnect the cable? Anybody have any other suggestion on how you would do that?
And set your dial to off.
Yeah. Would anyone be here satisfied with just turning a breaker off on their boat, the AC panel breaker? No. No. Thank God. Yes. Sometimes about 1% of people say that's enough. You're talking about your life here. Like Like, I mean, if you've got a boat, things are pretty good. Like, let's be honest. You want to keep it that way, right? Like life ain't that bad. Like, it's not like you want to get out. Like, things are good. So when you're playing with AC, no one should ever go, oh, I'm going to trust an AC breaker on my boat, and I'm going to disconnect it, and I'm going to assume that my AC breaker that costs about $10 is functioning properly because I'm willing to risk my life for $10. No, you're going to be like, physically disconnect. First of all, don't even leave it at the pedestal. Coil it back, put it, because someone could be walking beside your boat thinking, oh, look, the cord got disconnected. Let me be a good neighbor and reconnect it again, right? No, like in the real world, they have like service disconnect. They put lockouts. There's a tag. Like they go crazy because you can die, right? We're talking about your life. So you disconnect the boat. Your problem with your inverter is if you press that little button off, that little button goes over a telephone wire to another device that has to interpret that data and say, oh, the owner told me to turn it off. Now, this is not like a nuclear launch code left and right where there's an authentication going back to the remote. Are you sure? Yes. Did you confirm? Yes, it's off. You're trusting a little stupid little switch that's probably worth 5 cents with your life over a telephone wire, over a communications port that is going to basically listen to your command. It's almost like whispering, inverter off, please. Like, no, that's not good enough. You need to disconnect your inverter from DC power, because when you disconnect your inverter from DC power, the inverter can't make AC. And it's not my opinion. It's in the book. It's in ABYC. And here's the reason why. So you want to have an inverter service disconnect. Okay? All right. So what does an AC do on your boat? An inverter. Common things that you're going to do are a microwave. You're going to do AC outlets, run a TV. It could be a vacuum. It could be anything, right? Now, there's no limit to what you can do with inverters. I have a boater that has an inverter the size of runs the whole boat. I'm talking washing machine, water maker. I mean, the inverter is like 16 kW. I mean, no problem. His inverter is really off-grid. It's like a camp. It's like our work camp. It's a full industrial inverter. Most boaters are not going to do that. Most boaters have a reasonable size inverter, 2,000 watts, maybe a 4,000 watt inverter, 3,000 watt, 1,000 watts, and they're going to say, what are the essential things that I want to run off my inverter? And I'm going to choose those things. And generally, they're convenience items that they're going to run. Because remember, if you have a large inverter, you need a large battery bank, right? It's easy to have a large load. It's like having a black Amex. It's one thing to have a black Amex. You've got to pay the bill that comes with it. So I had another owner, a boater, he said to me, he says, I want a 8 kilowatt inverter. I'm like, okay, all right, what are you going to run with it? Had no idea. He's like, I just want a big inverter. I'm like, okay, let's do that. Sure, if that's what you want. Doesn't make any sense. What about your battery bank? And the battery bank was literally going to be 4 golf cart batteries. I'm like, no, you can't have literally an inverter that needs 20 golf carts and have only 4. Like, they work together. So most people are choosing reasonable loads to run off an inverter. Reasonable loads. So what does that look like, right? So you could have, some boaters have AC fridges only. It's possible. Some have dual purpose fridges. They'll have a fridge that's DC and AC, but some boaters have AC fridges only. Household fridge, basically. Big fridge, but it does not power off direct current. It only works off alternating current. So they'll have a fridge, they'll have outlets, a microwave, could be recharging power tools. It could be whatever. And then off their non-inverter load, they're going to have a hot water tank, a charger. You would never want a charger powered off an inverter, but I've seen it, where the owner literally would take power from the batteries to create inverting power. Inverting power would go to run a charger to recharge the batteries, and it was a vicious loop and the batteries, not coincidentally, would die within 2 hours. Because there's no such thing as a Da Vinci energy machine, right? There's no endless energy source. If you take something and you convert it, you lose power. There's a conversion power, a factor in everything. All right, so what do you want to do when you're looking for an inverter? You definitely, like a charger, marine model only. Absolutely essential. You have to, black and white, no exceptions. I have not installed a modified sine wave inverter on a boat in 12 years. So if you have one or you choose one, ask yourself, why would I do that? They were great before. A lot of us had them on our boats. They were affordable. But nowadays, considering that most AC loads that you are now running on a boat are what are called inductive loads, there's really two types of AC loads. There's AC loads that are inductive and resistive. Resistive loads, a heater, a light bulb, a toaster. Now, how many of us are going to run heat off an inverter? No one. A toaster? Sure. But let's talk about inductive loads. A microwave, power tools, a computer, a TV, an espresso machine, coffee machine. All those are inductive loads. So when you are buying an inverter for your boat, which inverter is most likely the one you need? You need a true sine wave inverter. Inductive loads need true sine wave. Not that it won't work on a modified sine wave, it's just not going to work well. And the other the huge aspect is that old inverters, like a modified sine wave inverter, are about 35% inefficient. So it's like going to the bank and saying, I want US dollars, and the exchange rate is, let's say, 1.3. The bank adds 2 points on the conversion, 3 points. This inverter adds 35%. So that's pretty significant. 35% to convert from AC to DC, or from DC to AC. And so I have tons of boaters that come to us and say, Jeff, for no reason alone, I have an AC fridge on my boat. To change that fridge, I have to literally disassemble the fridge. The boat was built around it. It's a massive deal. And right now it's running off an inverter that's inefficient, modified sine wave. It's less money for me to buy a true sine wave inverter than to change the fridge. Because the fridge is sort of the boat's built around the fridge. And so I've changed inverters for no other reason than going true sine wave and for efficiency gain. Because remember what I talked about with batteries? Batteries are like money. It's a very rare thing for someone to ever say, I have too much batteries or I have too much money. They're very rare. It happens, but very rarely. And it's a limited thing that it takes a lot. Even if you have a lot of batteries, then it's a lot to recharge them away from shore power. So since it's a rare commodity, you want to be frugal in how you spend that energy. And you do that by having a high efficiency inverter. Okay? The ability to control it remotely, to turn it on and off, is essential. I've done another video on YouTube about that, about how do you use your inverter charger, but having the ability to turn it on and off is really important. And you don't want to go in the engine room or wherever it is in a lazarette and toggle a switch. So most of them don't come with the remote panel, but I always install an inverter with a remote panel. What are things? By the way, now remember what I talked about a little bit earlier, and I said an inverter charger or an inverter manual is around 80 pages, 100 pages. Guess how many people read that manual? Practically none. Nobody. It's crazy. Who would do that? The inverter, to your question in the back, comes with just an inverter. It's like an IKEA table that only comes with a table, no legs, no chairs, no nothing. Like it's not even the whole table. It's just the tabletop. And people then look at this, they look at the manual, put the manual side away, and then they're going, let me prove to myself that I am capable of doing something without instruction. And they install the inverter, and they put no fuse, no inverter disconnect, no chassis ground, small wire, and generally also they don't read the manual, so they put the inverter, which is not ignition protected, in a gasoline engine room. The strike rate on inverters, the number of inverters I've ever seen properly installed is probably less than 1 or 2%. It is the most epic failure of all time on any boat is an inverter because the manual is just simply too intimidating and everyone simply wants to get it done. So 98% of you have inverters that is at least missing one of these things. And all of those things are not my opinion, they're in the manual, and the manuals never haven't probably been open. So absolutely essential that you have a fuse on the inverter, that you have a DC service disconnect, that you have a chassis ground, and then the wire size is made to handle the inverter. A lot of times what happens is they have an inverter that's 1,000 watts, and they're like, oh great, I'm going to change to 2,000, and they just change the inverter. They don't look at the wiring, because it's just simply going to work. You can't do that. Unfortunately, remember another rule at the beginning? Nothing's ever easy. That's rule number 1. Nothing is ever easy. All the time. There's always implications of a decision. I want to reiterate, an inverter, unlike a charger, chargers, many of them are ignition protected and can be installed in a gasoline engine room. Inverters, there is no such thing. I cannot tell you how many inverters I've seen in a powerboat, gasoline engines in the engine room. They replace the charger, assume that a charger and an inverter charger are the same. They are not. And now they have a non-ignition protected device in an engine room. And I want to emphasize, builders of boats go to great lengths to make an engine room ignition protected on a gasoline boat. Like, I'm talking not a couple dollars. They're going stupid to make sure that whole engine room is vapor proof in case of a gasoline leak. The moment you put in a automotive alternator in there that's not ignition protected, or a inverter charger that is not ignition protected, you defeated tens of thousands of dollars of effort to make that engine room vapor proof. Okay? So recap, this is basically what you're looking at. It's very essential to be conscientious about what's going to run on your inverter, right? It's not about bigger, it's about what am I trying to do with my inverter, and doing the inverter loads that are going to be running off the inverter. So opening the floor to some questions about inverters. Anybody have any questions? Yeah, go ahead.
If you buy like a 2K inverter with a charger option, what is the typical charging capacity? So,
Yeah.
because presumably if the wiring is okay for the inverter, it's going to be okay for the charging.
Absolutely. The question is, when you buy an inverter charger, and for instance, it's 2K. 2K means 2,000 watts inverter. And the charger, what is going to be the charger? The charger on a 2,000 watt inverter is generally going to be pretty much 80 amps, or on some ones 100. Your inverter can draw a lot more than 100 amps on a 2,000 watt inverter. The fuse actually on a 2,000 watt inverter is a 300 amp fuse. So it can actually pull up to 300 amps, and it can only give up to 100. So the question is, no problem. The charger will be able to charge on the same wires that was pulling 300. No problem whatsoever. That is actually a common thing that we end up doing with other boaters, is saying people might not care so much about a large inverter on their boat. Certainly I was one of them. Don't really care about it. It's nice to have, but not necessary. I wanted a large charger. So my inverter on my boat is 2,000 watts, and it comes with a 100 amp charger. And I really bought it for the 100 amp charger, because it's an affordable way of buying a 100 amp charger. To buy just a charger, 100 amps, is the same amount of money to buy an inverter charger for 100 amps. And the reason is, there's simply more inverter chargers that are sold. It's a more commonly used item than a 100 amp charger. 100 amp chargers are expensive, and about the same price as a 2,000 watt inverter charger that comes with a 100 amp charger. So a lot of times we'll put in a large inverter, not because the boater wants a large inverter, but because they want a large charger. Any other questions on inverters? Yeah, go ahead.
So we've got a small inverter in the stern cabin underneath the bed, and you mentioned about a remote breaker or switch or something.
Yeah.
I don't think we have.
No, the smaller ones don't. You want to have the breaker feeding, like the switch. Small inverters, like 300 watt, 800 watt, let's say, don't have remote panels. Remote panels only go minimum 1,000 and above.
So can you leave them on all the time?
Yeah, it's a proportion. The larger the inverter, the larger the idle draw is. And so a small inverter, like on my boat, I have 2 inverters. I have a large one that I never really use, and I have a 300 watt that I use all the time. My 300 watt inverter on my boat is left 24/7 when I'm cruising. I just have it there. Anybody want to plug in a phone charger, laptop, whatever it is, this kind of like small little appliance, just plugs into I have an outlet just for that, and it's 24/7. My large inverter is a manual process. Like if we need to run the large inverter, I'm actually going to, on the remote panel for the inverter charger, turn it on and off.
So during the winter it should be off?
Yeah, you probably, ideally yes. Yeah, ideally yes, but it's those inverters, yeah, ideally yes, but it's not so big a deal, because if it's a small inverter, proportionally the idle draw is not as big. If you have a 3,000 watt inverter that's just on in the background, that's bigger of an issue. Yes, question in the back?
On a small inverter, what's the difference between the marine and
Yeah, the big issue is actually, well, there's a couple of things. Marine inverters, for one, are going to automatically, especially inverter chargers, and this is a big issue, Inverter chargers, marine inverter chargers are going to be disconnecting the ground and the neutral and connecting it depending if it's on inverter or non-inverter mode. I could do a whole 2-hour thing on this, but there is a real difference. And the problem is when you ground, if your ground is permanently tied to your neutral and it's not a source of power, the implications for galvanic straight current corrosion are significantly higher. And that's why you don't want that. Because a marine inverter will actually, you'll hear a click, and it actually, when you enable the inverter, it's actually grounding the neutral and the ground together because it now becomes a source of power. And as soon as you disable it, it actually opens the circuit. Just trust me on it. I mean, I don't want to get too crazy, but just buy a marine. There's a reason. It's not a gimmick. Yes?
You said that with the modified sine wave, inverter uses about 35%
Yeah.
conversion loss. When is it on a true
5. Huge. I mean, think about, like I didn't, when we grew up, our family was very frugal. My mother acted like she didn't live the Great Depression, but she acted like we did. So it was crazy. Like money was always something she worried about. And when I think about boating, I actually kind of live by her way on the water because you just simply don't have enough power on a boat. You need to constantly be making decisions about turning things on and off, being moderate with your usage, because even though you might have a large battery bank, it's just so hard to make energy to restore that in a battery. Unless you have a boat that has generators, then it becomes a little easier, right? I mean, you've got generators, but for boaters that don't have a generator, and you only have an alternator to recharge your batteries, it can be a challenge to get everything. So that mindset of being frugal and thinking about efficiency matters when you have not a lot of money. It really does. And that's mindset I use on my own boat all the time. Any other questions on inverters? Yes?
I take your point about not buying the non-marine inverters. If I'm just running like a laptop, can I use the entire...
Yeah, that's different. Yeah, because you're not integrating with anything else. Yeah. Yeah, the little plug-in 12-volt cigarette. But also remember, sounds silly, but that 12-volt cigarette lighter can be wired with 14-gauge wire. I've seen it 16, 18-gauge wire. 18-gauge wire is probably like a hair strand. Like, I mean, it is tiny. It is not even spaghetti. It's like, I mean, it's nothing. I mean, if you didn't have a shield on it, is it there? Like, you wouldn't even see it. I see 12-volt cigarette lighters literally wired because an owner, a lot of us are energy efficient, trying to save money. And you're like, well, why would I buy a big wire that's 14 cents a foot when I can buy one for 8 cents a foot? It's a 4-foot run. I'm going to save 6 cents for 4 feet. That's 24. That's almost a quarter. I'm going to go with an 18-gauge wire. I cannot tell you how many 12-volt cigarette lighters I've seen wired underwired, and then people come in literally with a large 300-watt Canadian Tire, and they plug it in, assuming that someone that is always worrying, is wiring everything for all permutations. The person who put that 12-volt cigarette lighter didn't worry about anything. They're just kind of lackadaisical, like, well, whatever, it happens. I'm only charging my phone. But then the next person comes in and they're using an inverter. Not like an iPad, but literally a 300-watt inverter. So that's the thing. Assumptions get you in trouble on a boat. I've seen wires melted so deep, so crazy, like they're charcoaled. It's and I'm like, oh my God, you almost lost your boat. They're like, oh my God. And I'm like, yeah, because people take shortcuts. Yes?
Are only charging laptops or phones or whatever. What about those little DC, AC plug-in things as opposed to inverter?
That is an inverter.
Yeah, or the little, as opposed to this type of system.
Yeah, that's anything that converts DC to AC is an inverter. There's tiny ones. There's nothing wrong with that. You buy an inverter for the loads, right? Give you another example. I had another boater change 3 Nespresso machines. 3 on a modified sine wave. 1, Nespresso makes a terrible product. How frustrating. And it's a huge inconvenience, right? The owner thinks. Next, brings it back, blows again. This is ridiculous. Like, this is crap. Like, what the hell? 3rd time? Oh, I'm not that unlucky. We get an electrical audit, sure enough. running modified sine wave inverter on an espresso machine, which is an inductive load. Can't do it. Change to true sine wave, no problem. Right, so a lot of times looking inward, right? Why would that happen? Am I unlucky, or is it something on my boat? It's easy to blame others, but it doesn't solve your problem, right? It's always looking inward. Yes?
Is it easy to find out if your inverter is true or modified sine wave?
Yeah, it's gonna. If it's true sine wave, it's gonna say on top of it, guaranteed. And if it's anything, not. You could always take a picture if you're wondering. Send me an email. I'll tell you right away, or look up the model. But most of them will brag about being true sine wave. It's like there's no such thing as an AGM battery that doesn't say AGM on it. Like, it's not like Mercedes doesn't build cars without their sign on the car. Like, it's a Mercedes. They're like, the logo's huge. I want everyone to know the quality they're buying. Nobody builds an AGM and says, oh, let's hide it from people and charge twice the price. And anybody who's buys a battery that has caps on it, but has a sticker AGM that weighs half the battery. I had another boater bought a battery deal from the trunk of a car. Great smoking deal. Half the weight. It's an AGM battery with vent caps. And it's an 8D, and it was like crazy price. Where do you buy it? Oh, this guy's got a car. It's just right out of the car. He's got no overhead. Just goes right out. It's like direct from the manufacturer. Amazing. I'm like, no, sorry, buddy. There's no such thing as a lead AGM battery that has actually maintenance caps. And if it's half the weight, it's half the battery. Like, there's no such thing as a miracle half weight lead acid battery. You're buying lead. If it's half the weight, you got half the battery. I don't care. It's in a big case. It just doesn't work like that. So there's no such thing, again, as too good to be true. Like, that's a good adage, right, on a boat. Too good to be true, it probably is. Okay. Other questions before we dive in on something else?